their purposes. Okay, that's a good reminder to know it's being recorded for time and all prosperity, but posterity. So I think this whole idea of we have been promised, even when I was named as House Chair, Speaker Moyle told me, you have to hear a bill. And I said, well, we can hear one, but I'm not going to promise you we're going to pass one. And he said, well, all I'm asking is that we have said we're going to hear something on school choice and that this is it, we had moved from voucher system to tax credit. And so we did, but it wasn't enough. And that's what I was told, is that, that the word that he received, both from within the caucus and from outside, that pour in quite a bit, substantial amount of money into campaigns, is that we dropped the ball and that we didn't get it over the finish line, and that we can be rest assured that there will be another run for public tax dollars going to private institutions. So I think the Idaho School Board Association has it's their 8th resolution that they are going to stand in firm opposition to it. You're starting to hear the governor and the superintendent of schools trying to maybe find that least offensive, least financially catastrophic way of trying to throw a bone this way, or try to head it off and not have it be what we see in states that have, they've tried it. It has just blown up the budget. And I'm just going to tell you exactly what I said to Speaker Moyle, and that is that I can't imagine, as a fiscal conservative, anything less fiscally conservative than to take public tax dollars and to start pouring that into private institutions, especially when you're not asking them to show the expectations for them are non-existent. You're just going to give it to them. And I said, everywhere this has happened, it's blown up the budget. It has just been twice, 3 times, and growing in Arizona. And you'll hear the people who are proponents of it saying, oh, no, it really isn't. But the proof's in the dollar. You can see the budget. You can see what it says. So we have that issue. And then we have, even tangentially to it, we're going to hear the library bill come back in that we're going to remove private schools out of that language of them having to live up to what can be on shelves and what the process is. And I find that bizarre, in as much as if we're going to push that public tax dollars are going to be funneled into these organizations, then we're going to also take out the expectation that they live up to the supposed protection for all children. So either we mean that we are protecting all, or I guess we don't. And it appears that, and that is what I heard Representative Crane, who sits on the chair of state affairs, he said to the statesman in that interview that his brother Jaron had told him, Representative Jaron Crane, that he was going to bring it back with that idea of pulling the private schools out. So I just keep getting political whiplash as I watch us say one thing and then we do another. And I think you should prepare yourself for that same thing. And I don't know if you want to just go ahead and buy you a next stabilizer now, or if you just want to do what I intend to do, which is, what are the questions that you can write to your legislators and ask them that would require them, that's not a form letter? Because let me tell you what happens when somebody writes it for you. Oftentimes you think, well, I couldn't say it any better than that. So you just hit the one click thing and off it goes to everybody. But what a lot of legislators do is that they have it set up so it just goes into a file, and they may or may not ever see it. And they may or may not think, well, they didn't ask me a question, so I didn't answer it. I mean, I heard that quite a bit. So to me, if you could just get into the habit of, as you come up with questions, or as you say, well, wait a minute, how can you say this and say this? How do those two things jive? And ask them, you're not being snotty. I mean, that's just a a reasonable, rational thing to ask someone is, how are you making those two things? How do those coexist in a rational world? And so ask them to explain to you. Now, especially if they are your legislator in your district, you've asked them a specific question, and you can expect then, I think, to get a specific answer. And then I think that you help put them on the record for and give them something to think about, because that's the other thing. The people that aren't on certain committees, you will hear them say, even Representative Brent Crane said, well, that's not my committee, so he really doesn't know much about it. And to me, the point of groups like the League of Women Voters, the Children Are Primary, it isn't to bully people and to grade them necessarily, but it is to hold us accountable in as much as you should get a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. And to me, that is your strength, is how do you ask the right questions? So as we talk through this, I guess I would just, the other things that we're going to see besides this probably tax credit, I suspect is what will come back, but I wouldn't be all that surprised if that supposedly gold standard of the Arizona universal choice, I guess I wouldn't be totally surprised to if that came back around in all of its glory as well, even though we had to take the word Arizona out of it a couple of times because it wasn't written specifically for Idaho. But that's my snark for today, and I'll try to stop now. The other thing that I think you're going to see come back, because the governor wants it to, is launch, and to fully fund launch. And this will be this juxtaposition of these two things is going to, I think, be fascinating to watch. Because on the one hand, those that are proponents of the tax credit will say, well, launch is the same thing. You've already opened the door, and you're letting public tax dollars go to private institutions like BYU, for example, and NU. So I guess to me, it could possibly become that bargaining chip of where we'll give you this tax credit thing that seems like it's in a little box as far as, you have to be how much money you make is at this level, and you're not already in a private school. They'll put some guardrails on it that appear that it's more narrow in its focus and really focusing on low socioeconomic and those with special needs, because that's been the battle cry even from Representative Horman, is that she just feels like that that the regular public schools are not meeting the needs of all students, specifically some that have special needs. So that will be an interesting collision course to see if we're going to go ahead and fund launch, even though they say the same things about launch that I just got done saying about tax credits, or are we going to try to do away with launch? And then how do you square that with still wanting to move forward with that tax credit? So, the Idaho Constitution doesn't say anything about once they graduate, but as we opened, it does say something very specific about what it means to have a general, uniform, thorough system of public, free, common schools. And as far as I know, Boise State, CWI, U of I, none of them have ever been free. So, to compare the two is, to me, an unfair and kind of disingenuous comparison. So I think those are going to be two things that you're going to see. If President Trump does get rid of the Department of Education, and with it, all the funding mechanisms that go with it, that will be a really interesting, it will be interesting to see how we square that. Well, with how are the states going to then meet the burden of special education and the title programs that currently come through our tax dollars from a federal level into the state. The other part of that I think that we'll see is that Representative Brent Crane also said that there's interest in that maintenance of previous effort, that if students who they've been paying X number of dollars because they have specific special needs, even if they move or graduate, the school is still expected to meet that previous maintenance of effort. And so I think there will be possible legislation to say, can we look at that? And if the student is no longer there, then why should those dollars still have to go into that program if they aren't, if the need isn't there? So that will be another interesting thing I think you might see. Along with it, that what I do hope will come back is Superintendent Critchfield had come up with her weighted amounts for different students. And it just makes sense that when you're doing that funding formula, just somebody showing up, enrollment is not, we were going with that and now it's average daily attendance, but it never parsed out that it doesn't cost the same amount to educate some students as other students. And so she had it all worked out, the weights. And I think it just became kind of a personal issue that we got right up to the very last day of session. And I was still ready to run it up and down the stairs and try to get it through. And it did not happen. So when that one comes through on the student weighted ADA, I'm hoping that you'll be supportive of Superintendent Critchfield's plan to say that, it costs more to educate some students than others, and we need to be willing to address that. And I still think, I understand the governor's reluctance of not wanting to move away to ADA to permanently look at enrollment, but some of you have been teachers and you can't make kids show up, and they have reasons for why they don't show up. And then to say, but you don't get paid for them, even though the lights still have to stay on, the teachers are still there. It's a tough argument. So I think you're going to see something within that weighted student weights. And I would hope you would support that. I think you're also going to see the governor push for fully funding public schools, because I think it's become really clear that supplemental levies aren't supplemental anymore, and that getting them to pass in some areas it's almost impossible, which is exactly what some people want. But the facilities, even what we passed, while I think it was the good right start, it isn't going to be enough, and it won't be quick enough. And even Speaker Moyle and Jason Monks, Representative Monks, who sponsored that bill, he even said it on he said it right on the House floor that it wasn't going to be enough and fast enough. And so I think you'll see, I'm hoping that you're going to see something around that as well, that a way to assist schools, especially those that are really having issues with their facilities just being in such disrepair, and with their supplementals. The last thing that I think that you will see has something to do with outcome-based education. And this would be my caveat to you. I have no problem with schools being held accountable for student growth, but I would really hope that what we would see is that it would be based on a growth model, not that everybody has to get to proficient, because there are enough of you who are teachers, full well that sometimes you can get a kiddo to start from where they start to where they finish, and they make more than a year's worth of growth, but they're still not proficient as measured by the IRI or the ISAT. So those are things that I think you're going to see in the upcoming session, and that's just kind of a quick overview of what I think will happen.
Well, I really appreciate that overview. Rod is not with us yet, and I am going to take a special privilege here. One of our members, our maven, our spreadsheet maven, Eleanor Chahy, put together a list of the private schools, and it's the districts in which they are, the legislative districts and the counties. So we have 26 counties that have private schools, and 18 counties with no private schools, and 28% of the private schools are in Ada County alone. If you could, from a perspective of a legislator, how are legislators justifying their votes and their support of funneling money to private schools when many of them have no private schools in their districts? What if you could kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and let us know what kind of pressure they're getting, from whom, who's whining and dining them, and how they're justifying their votes. Thank you.
Right. Wow, that is one loaded question. And I probably don't even know all the players, but I do know that from Mountain State Institute, and they will tell you they're kind of so where Idaho Freedom Foundation is the strong arm of that. Mountain State Institute is the soft but equally, I think, divisive and equally put pressure on people to say, this is what we expect from you. And if you don't get it, we're going to. So they don't, Mountain States doesn't, they don't give money to people, but who they have in their corner to say, these are the people you need to target with negative dollars to get them out. And I think that was my downfall. Was not that I wasn't doing something to say, here's where we're going. It was all that Make Liberty Win, Young Americans for Liberty. There was a lot of outside of the state money. The Citizens Alliance, Idaho Citizens Alliance, they ran a lot of negative ads against legislators who had the audacity to have the opinion that public tax dollars shouldn't go to private institutions. And, you know, when you have the Idaho Constitution on your side, as you point out, in two different sections, the Blaine Amendment and the just the thoroughness statute for all public schools, I'm not sure how you make a case other than you've been told that's what you're going to do, and it's what my constituents want. And if you're only listening to the ones who say that these are the ones who elected me, and not listening to anyone else, then I think you can make the case that, you know, in Canyon County, I will tell you, it was at least 3-1 against, but those aren't always people who get out and vote. And they a lot of times weren't maybe necessarily registered Republicans either. They're just concerned Idahoans who just say that's not where we should go. So you have, and then there are some just really deep pockets of people in Idaho who are giving a large, significant amount of money to even Mike Moyle's fund, or, you know, different people to parse out as they see Idahoans for prosperity. They're just different avenues that you can get money to go where you want it to go, and to who you want it to go. And I don't believe it's going into someone's pocket. It's going towards getting them either elected or somebody unelected. And so there's, you know, that's kind of what you're dealing with. A lot of out of state, even Charlie Kirk, and there you can look at that. The Koch brothers, Nancy, Betsy DeVos, that DeAngelis guy. They make a lot of money on fomenting fear and anger about what's happening supposedly in our public schools, and why we need to give this safety valve and this outlet to parents to get kids out of these failing woke schools and into private schools, even when the 26 counties and 18 without, and it will hurt rural counties. It's sort of like, well, you can tell me that, but I'm not hearing it. I'm not going to listen to that.
Well, Julie, so we just heard that the section of the funding bill that didn't pass had to do with the rural funding formula for rural states and schools in rural states. So that, I think they said that was like $70 million a hit to Idaho. It was pretty big. I can't remember if that was Idaho or Oregon, but it's going to affect rural schools profoundly. How is that going to affect this discussion?
Well, I hope it will. The issue that we see happening in Idaho, unfortunately, is that some of those rural areas are geographically huge, but people not huge. You know, there's not as many people, and so their representation ends up being one person for these huge geographical areas. And, you know, that's just not when they say follow the money, that's the deal. You got to follow the money. And the rural schools, They simply will say it's not going to hurt rural schools, period. And I guess if you say it, it must be true.
Well, what's the best argument of coming back to them when they say things that are obviously false, like that one?
Yeah, I have to tell you that I was not successful in coming up because I just keep coming up with. So if it's a fact that most of the kids that are going to uh, benefit from this are already in private schools, then why are we doing this? And the answer is, well, you don't know that. And that somehow Idaho's going to be different. And that has been such the frustration point is that, we just think we're going to, it's Idaho, we're going to do it better. And even though all evidence from any quarter in the nation has said otherwise. And we even had a person in from Indiana who talked to us about it and just said, whatever you do, don't do this. And they just dismiss him as a quack, as somebody who, he's probably getting his pockets lined by someone, and therefore you can just wash your hands of it and not hear it.
Last year, Rod's group brought a woman from Elizabeth Best from Arizona, who I thought was extremely effective in talking about what has happened. I've heard her speak multiple times since then. The situation has just gotten worse. That in Arizona, it's affected a lot of other programs now outside of education to be able to fund this program. This year, apparently, the group is bringing two more speakers in, and we're hoping when Rod joins us that he can give us a little more information about that. I'm going to turn this over to Kathy. Kathy has been bird dogging this very closely. Kathy, and you had an interesting question.
Yes. First of all, I want to let you know that I've tried to reach Rod. He was coming in on a flight that was supposed to arrive at 4. And so we're hoping he still can join us. I've written him an email, but I don't have a phone number for him, and I don't know if he can answer his phone anyway if he's on the plane. So I hope he will show up. But in the meantime, I just want to address this question of money, because I agree with you, Julie, that this is totally fiscally uh, inappropriate. It's a disaster. And I guess what I did was I looked up some information about how much money is going to be lost. I mean, there's no way they can say that this will not affect public education. It will affect not only public education, but transportation, infrastructure, every aspect of our general fund that is paid for with our taxes. Because if you get a tax credit, first of all, I'm trying to find my numbers now. I can't find them, but I figured out that in order for you to get a $5,000 tax credit, well, first of all, in order for you to have a $5,000 tax liability, you would have to be making $89,000 a year. And that's taxable income, not gross income. Okay. Now, I did find that the median, that is halfway, of Idahoans' families make that much. But that means half of Idaho's families do not make that much. And yet you're offering these $5,000 tax credits to people who don't even have that much tax liability. So not only are you taking away the taxes from those who would be paying them and going into our general fund, but you're also giving people money that they have not rightfully earned in any way, right? And
Correct.
whatever happens, I mean, we need a diagram. We need a pie that gets smaller, because that's what's going to happen. And that pie pays for a lot more than just public education. So that's my main argument. And there was a question from Betsy who said, what is the common outside funding source for these legislative proponents? Where are they saying the money is going to come from?
Well, they think there's enough because what they're saying is that if they're not in the public schools, then you're not paying the public schools that money because it's based on enrollment, not ADA. Now you start to see why we're moving away from ADA and going to enrollment, because now I can make the case that, oh, they're not there, so that money should follow the child and it shouldn't be changing this at all.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's probably nobody that I'm looking at your face or your little profile here that isn't sitting there thinking, well, that is nonsensical because the lights still have to be on. You still have to have teachers, X number of teachers. There are still curriculum that has to, there are all of these things, but common sense doesn't seem to be part of this conversation, and I said to Speaker Moyle when I was talking about what it means to be conservative, as I said, to your point, if you look at how much of your taxes go to public schools, it's nowhere near that $5,000 or $6,000. And we're going to say 8,000 of it follows them out the door. And I said, in what universe is it conservative that not only will you get more than what you put in, but you get to put your hand in my pocket so you can go to private school and in about 10, 20 other people's pockets. I have never heard of anything less fiscally conservative in my whole life. And I am old and it is not computing. And it's not going to compute because what we have here is there's an ideological silver bullet that they think they have their hands on, and that they have just decided as part of our proof that we're the most conservative state in the nation, that we're going to ramrod this thing through come hell or high water, and the kids be damned. And that's how I see it. I just don't see that there is no rational argument that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. The other information I found was that the average private school tuition in Idaho is about $8,838. So it's not even enough to say 5,000.
And if you don't have the money, $1,000 short might as well be the whole amount short. If you don't have that much, especially if you have more than one child that you're trying to send. Well, and they want to totally ignore the idea too that almost everywhere this has happened, what does the private school do? They just raise tuition by that much, and
Mm-hmm. Right. So what is the situation with a family that has more than one child and they get a $5,000 credit, or do they get more credit for each child? So in other words, they're getting, how does this work?
Well, the one that came through that didn't make it through, not House Ed, but Rev and Tax, mind you. Mm-hmm. And those people that voted no on that paid a price for that too, because political courage they took a hit, and it's just that simple. But right. That whole idea is just they just don't even give it any credibility. Doesn't matter.
So the idea was, though, that it would be a first come, first serve.
And it would only be up to 3 kids. Up to 3 kids, I think.
Okay, but again, up to 3 kids, that's $15,000 tax credit when you haven't even got that much tax liability. So the money's got to come from somewhere. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was seeing that right.
Well, there you go, being logical and using common sense again, and this just is not acceptable. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Jean is going to read a couple of questions from a couple other members that we've got here in the chat.
Oh, good.
I have a question from Kayla, who is, as you well know, one of the most famous people at the legislature. She asks, are online education companies lining up to provide private schooling in our rural areas in 18 counties without private schools?
Oh, you can bet your sweet bippy that's happening.
So are these for profit? Is that what these are, these online schools?
Yeah. And then what we have seen in other states is that they can fly in, and then if they feel like they've flooded the market, or there isn't a market there, or it's not paying them off, then they're just gone. And then where do those kids go? Well, they probably go right back into the public schools, but the money doesn't follow them back in because the money's been spent. What could possibly go wrong?
Right. So Denise has a question too. Do you expect there to be a limit on the number of vouchers or credits issued? Thinking about the existing private schoolers and those members. So every time someone requests these tax credits, hundreds and hundreds of people a year, there's no limit?
I believe there will, because I think to pass it, they're going to do just like they did with empowering parents. They'll start it small and with enough guardrails that it looks like, oh, somebody's finally caring for that kid that just doesn't fit into public school and making it possible for them to go to a private school. And that's a whole nother discussion as far as are those, I think you're even going to see something from the governor that says, how do we help these private schools up their services to the students who need it for that, maybe partially for that reason. But, I think that you'll see something that starts off smaller than just like Arizona did, because they tried to go big when Tammy Nichols came in with the Arizona universal the voucher system, and now the tax credit was smaller than that, and I think they might try to go even smaller than that to try to get it through. And then with this idea that you can what the last one said last year is that the legislature would revisit it the next year and see what happened, and if there's more need, and then fund it for more.
So the people who already have students the parents who have students in private schools right now, they can apply for these tax credits with the students in there, right? So even though they're not using any now and they're finding a way to pay they can now get this $5,000, even if, as Kathy says, their tax liability doesn't merit or warrant that amount of money. So I have a question too. North Dakota and Texas are the only other states that have triple the governor and the House and the Senate are all Republicans. So it's a full slate of one party. They're the only two states other than us who don't have yet a tax credit or voucher program. Do you know anything about how, especially Texas, has been able to stave off this attack?
I don't. I would guess though that there are enough. There just must not be enough of the negative. I would say give it time. I think Idaho's easier because we're smaller for that. The negativity and all those, when I was going door to door, there was somebody 2 houses ahead of me, and they were showing me the stuff that they were giving them. Neither thing was from within Idaho. Both of them were from outside groups. Texas is huge, and trying to launch that sort of a pushing out, I think would be more challenging and more money. So I think they go for the lower hanging fruit. And believe me, Texas will still see a push. I don't believe that they won't.
So our corollary might be North Dakota, something to look at.
Yeah.
Well, I get several. I have several subscriptions to papers in Texas, and Texas rural schools are very proud to be rural schools, and they're the center of their communities, and that's not unusual here either. So those rural schools have everything to do with why it hasn't passed there. But as Julie said, the pressure is on. They are absolutely going to take it to the mat, their legislative session coming up. So it's a priority for their governor and for a lot of the elected representatives. And just like here, they launched very successful campaigns to get rid of legislators who stood in the way. And so same money, the same organizations funded that in Texas. So she's right, it's just going to be a matter of time. But the pride in rural schools is important. They're the center of their communities. And so that's the same here.
I think what the interesting point of that is that what we seem to be as a national consciousness, we seem to have this idea that still, even when you looked at Boise State's Dr. May's study, most people thought their own public school was okay, but everybody else's was going to heck in a handbasket and full of all this woke ideology and needs to be, done away with and that sort of thing. And so I think that this eroding that they've been working on really for years and years is just becoming, we're just starting to see it come to fruition, that more people are believing it. And I really believe that part of the reason that Representative Crane is going to take out that library, the reason I threw that in there, that he's going to take out that private schools aren't held under that same expectation under that library bill. I think the reason for that is because getting pushback from, okay, you said you weren't going to, there won't be government overreach into us if you have these tax credits, and yet here you just passed this bill that where the government is reaching into the private libraries of private schools and we're not getting any dollars. Well, okay, so if you start getting dollars, then we're going to need to put that back into the library bill. And I would think you would need to put some expectation of accountability measures back in for those private schools too. And they don't want them. And the homeschoolers certainly do not want any of government interference. But there's even the opening of the tax credits for homeschooling as well. It doesn't matter how you're doing it. And we're not going to ask you how you're spending it. And even with empowering parents, have we seen a problem with that? Did they not have to undergo an audit? Is there not still an issue with how are those tax dollars being spent? And how are you making the case that a trip somewhere or, doing other fun stuff, or, skiing, going up skiing at Bogus and having season passes, that's part of your educational expenses. Okay. I mean, it's your PE. Okay. You can just start seeing how it just kind of devolves into this. I would not think what anybody would think tax dollars ought to be doing. So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask Kayla to ask you, Julie, the question that she has about accountability.
Okay.
I'm just curious if it might be a good point for us to make when we're talking to legislators that since it's our money, well, I can't remember how I said it, would they please put some accountability measures in for the private schools if they receive money from vouchers?
Such a good question, and one that was actually posed. And this was the response that we got. They are already held accountable by parents either having their kids there or not.
Okay.
But to me, would that not be then the same that you would say public schools?
Right.
Oh, yeah, I think it would. But, goose gander, what's fair for the goose, right?
Right. Thank you.
So good question. I'd ask it. I mean, I would.
Mm-hmm.
So we are privileged to have a former president of the Idaho Libraries Association. I'm going to put you on the spot, Becky, and ask maybe you could have a conversation about the bill that Julie has been talking about to exempt private school libraries from the rule about the adult section and all of that. So, Becky, do you have any thoughts on the difference between private school libraries and public school libraries?
This is Becky. And I also, this is the time of every afternoon, I have a little beast who just demands to play fetch. And so that's why I have to be muted because she might bark. As far as, I mean, they're just, I'm flabbergasted that they would think that would be okay to exempt private school libraries and somehow, I mean, if they are squeaky clean and they want to use that as a reason, well, fine. But what if I walk into a private school library and I see something that offends me? I don't know. I can't, that's just an incredible double standard that just, I mean, I don't know even what to say, Jean. It's just so wrong.
How are they justifying it? This is Jaron Crane, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
how,
I think he's justifying it by saying that they aren't getting that. He's probably going to say that what he's heard back from constituents and those in private schools is that they aren't receiving tax dollars, and so they shouldn't be held to the same accountability as a public entity. And that's why I said about the political whiplash of, you're just going, wait, what? Because if they are going to start getting tax dollars, now we're going to have to go right back and change the library law to put them back under the umbrella because they are getting, and are we actually so naive as to assume that every private school is going to live up to the standards of any other harmful materials that we seem to think that the ones that are currently operating are holding themselves to? And to Becky's point, what if I'm offended by something that that is not necessarily within their realm of what is other harmful materials, but I can say it's harmful to me? Well, then what? So it's just a really interesting kind of game of watch the walnut shells move around and try to figure out where something's what's under it.
so Julie, the other thing that we're doing this year is forming strategic alliances with other organizations and associations and groups. And you've mentioned the Idaho School Boards Association and the Children Are Primary. What other allies can we form allegiances with for this issue?
Well, I think the Mormon Women for Ethical Government has, I've met with them about 2 or 3 times, I'm trying to remember, and just seems to me like they have a pretty balanced and level-headed approach to things. And so that would be a group I would think might be worthwhile. And the Idaho Association of School Administrators, Andy Grover, that dude has his ear to the ground and he knows what's going on, and I think could give you, he hears a lot of things from the rural schools that might not make it to the larger conversation because they are they're small rural schools. And maybe when I keep saying about asking the pertinent questions, that if you can find somebody who's in that district to ask their legislator that question, and for it to become a thing in that area so that people in the area understand how that's going to affect their school that they think is actually a good school. Maybe we start to make some headway.
Jean,
Yeah.
along those same lines, there's a question that Betsy had. Given the shrinking pot, are there other interests that could be brought into the fight, like ag or transportation? Since all of those are going to be impacted by the loss of funds, right?
Well, wait till we see what happens to Medicaid, the Medicare expansion thing, because that's the other thing they're talking about wanting to, well, the chair of Health and Welfare, Representative Vanderboy, would like to just do away with it altogether, even though it was voted in by the people of Idaho and still enjoys a pretty healthy support. Just they feel like it's, I guess, again, this is the whiplash. That budget they feel like is out of control. And part of their argument is that it's going to start affecting how much can go to education. And yet we're going to do the same thing in education and blow it up with this tax credit thing. And now we're going to have 2 mammoth expenditures that you think will obliterate everybody else. So as for the roads and that sort of thing, because of all that money that got that influx that came in from the COVID dollars, the pandemic dollars, they have their list of things that need to be fixed and that are in progress and slated to be, and money that needs to be spent. It's going to keep them busy for a while. And so are they going to feel as motivated right now? I'm going to tell you, probably not. Now, down the road, yeah. Ag, possibly. And there still are some ranchers, farmers in the legislature, but their numbers are dwindling. And as we see that happen, as we see that instead of worrying about that kind of farming, we're worried about Bitcoin farming and giving money to that guy to have this digital currency and take up all of this bandwidth, and it can just blow up your broadband system, and yet it narrowly failed in the House, and that would have definitely been lining somebody's pocket, and yet it was there were 2 representatives at least, and 3 or 4 more who stood up in support of it, because for various reasons, but I would also suspect they probably maybe get help with their campaigns. I hate to put everything to that, but let's face it, money does talk, and it does motivate.
I'm going to put Mary Mosley on the spot now. Mary, you have some questions.
There, finally got it unmuted. Yeah, well, my question was about the lawsuit against the library bill. And that was about, that lawsuit was brought by private libraries. Mm-hmm. And so is that why they're bringing back the bill to take out private libraries? I remember that John Gannon asked a question whether or not the legislature could do that, whether or not the state had any jurisdiction over private libraries, and no one knew, including him. So they passed it. So yeah, that was my first question.
I think they always are thinking, what I've been told a number of times is the argument that it has problems and shouldn't pass works when I'm voting no. The argument that, well, we'll pass it because it's going to protect kids immediately, and then we'll fix the bugs later, is the other side of that same mm-hmm. coin. And that's what, whatever suits your purpose at the time.
And then, Mary, you added the good point that the Satanic Temple had testified in support of the voucher bill. And we were wondering, too, about madrasas and other Wiccans opening schools. Do people just laugh testifiers like that out of the room, or is there anything to trying that tactic?
Yeah, they did. They just said it was ridiculous. It's Idaho. It's not going to happen. And, because, I said the very same thing, and also said, I guarantee you what's going to happen as soon as we pass this, there will be a lawsuit. And the very next day, that was 3/14. So it was the iterations back. The very next day in Davis County in Utah, somebody filed something. I wanted the Bible out of every public school because she said it was that there were things that were offensive to her. One only has to read the Bible to see that it's such a story of the human race that, warts and all, pretty ugly in places. So that immediately happened. But even that was laughed off. That was just, not an issue. So when you have legislators who are willing to get up and say, this is either you want drag queen performances in schools or you don't, and I'm not open to any questions. I'm not going to entertain any questions. It's simple. You either want to protect kids or you don't. End of story. If that's what you're dealing with, and you have enough people in that way of thinking, you can see why this legislative session is shaping up to be quite the humdinger.
Jean, we have a question from Kendall that I think we should do before we close. It appears that around 75% of private schools are religious schools. Please discuss the implications for the Blaine Amendment.
So what I heard about the Blaine Amendment, because I used that, and even from a Democrat was told that's the best you could come up with. They thought it was a poor argument, but it is on the books. And what you're going to hear, I believe, is that Representative or Senator Lenny may very well come back again with his bill to get rid of that. He wants to put that on the to get it off of the books, to have a constitutional amendment to get rid of it. And how they're going to frame it is that it was developed to be anti-Catholic, and that it is actually limiting the freedom of religion to practice religion, and should have never been there in the first place. And I believe that's what you're going to see, a push to just get rid of the Blaine Amendment, because if there's something pesky that keeps you from doing what you want to do, then by all means, you should just get rid of it.
But it is a constitution, it's in the Constitution, so it would require a vote of the people, would it not?
It would. But see, it's all how you frame the argument, right? And if you're going to say in this particular environment that our rights to religion, to practice religion, are being attacked, and that Christianity is under attack, and if you look at what's going on in the world, that it's not popular to be a Christian, and maybe they're not coming for you now, but they're going to be coming for you. And you're talking to, I'm a born again believing Christian person, but I'm listening to all that fomenting of fear and anger, and I'm hearing it in churches around, especially here around Canyon County, and just thinking, wow. First of all, I just think Jesus must weep as he listens to all this stuff. And secondly, I think that if you ride that pony and you can get people whipped up to say that Blaine Amendment is actually going to work against your ability to practice your faith, and we're going to go with faith, family, and freedom. You see where I'm going with that? You see how you build your case, and then you package it into this thing that Charlie Kirk and others can just grab onto, and they put all kinds of money and sound bites behind and go door to door. I think even the open primary, take a little bit of misinformation and twist it just a little bit, send it out there, and it worked. So, I don't want to be a bearer of bad ill tidings, but that it seems to be the environment we are dealing with.
Well, we appreciate your honesty and your expertise and your vantage point, because I think it feels like this is not a fair fight. It feels like there is so much money coming in from outside. The influence coming in from not Idahoans, but from outsiders with, a lot of money to spend. And then the rest of us who believe in public education, believe it's a unifying feature of America, and want to protect it, want it to be the best it can be. And stripping money away from it is not going to help it be the best it can be. But also, this is just straight up about Christian nationalism. And I think looking at the list of private schools, and it's fine if people want to send their kids to private schools. My kids were in and out of private schools. We paid. I totally get that. And I don't care if they're religious or not. It's just that I'm not going to support somebody's religious education. Because I profoundly believe that is a unifying force in this country. And we have to have public education. And our Constitution is very clear in that regard. So I really thank you for your service to the state. We, as somebody mentioned earlier, we will miss your wisdom, but we are going to be able to tap into that wisdom, because I know you're going to stay in this fight, and that you'll always be a huge supporter of public education. Do you have any parting words before we sign off? I'll have Jean close, but do you have anything you'd like to say in the end?
Well, first, just thank you for the opportunity, because 4 years in the legislature, I don't think I'm an expert, but I did have a front row seat, literally a front row seat on what was going on. And so I appreciate the opportunity to just, and it is from my vantage point, there's no doubt about that. But I just really appreciate that there is somebody who is woke in the best sense of that word, that you are awake to what is going on and what we have to lose in this deal. And that as Americans, that if we're going to put America first, if we really are going to do that, make America great again, It is not by putting any religion in cahoots with the government to tell everybody how we're going to live and what we're going to believe and how we're going to do it. And I say that, as I said, as somebody who is a firm believer in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, but I do not believe that that is the way to go. So I appreciate your willingness on a Sunday to give of your time and your thinking and your willingness to say, we're not going to just sit here and wring our hands and be sorry. We're going to try to do something. So I appreciate you all.
Thank you so much, Julie. Jean, do you want to wrap it up?
Actually, before Jean.
Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I have a couple of things I just want to say. I appreciate you so much, Julie. And regarding your explanation and passion about your religion and what's going on with the Christian Nationals, I want to tell everyone about an organization I just discovered. It's called Faithful America. If you Google that and go online, it's about a coalition of churches that are totally opposing Christian this whole Christian nationalism movement. And so you might find some comfort there, and also a way to take action, because that's what they're doing. The other thing I want to mention is I suddenly thought of this in my head: school choice. Those are the words used, school choice. And you know what? That is not an appropriate name for this, right? We all know this because we already have plenty of school choice in Idaho. What I'm saying, why don't we look at this and start talking about it in terms of the schools are choosing the students. It's the schools, these private schools, choose the students, right? Not all students can attend them. So anyway, that's another thing. And the last thing I want to mention is, although Rod is not here today, he has told me that, like the last several legislative sessions, the Idaho Business for Education is sponsoring speakers at the very beginning of the session. I believe it'll be in the Lincoln Auditorium, either the first or second days of the session, that are going to speak to this issue directly. And one of them is Josh Cohen, who's the author of the book, The Privateers. And the other one, I don't know. I was going to ask him if he came today, who the other one is, but I'll get that information from him and let everybody know how we can tune in to those presentations. So
Josh Cohen is top drawer. He is top notch.
Okay.
Yes, excellent.
Good. So I did want to let everybody know about that, and that we'll keep you posted on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, so very much. And this is the kind of conversation we will have every Friday during the legislative session. We may not have a superstar as our guest every time, but we will have these kind of quality conversations at the Legislative Action Committee meetings. And those are Fridays. The first one is January 10th. And we'll be talking not only about the threat we're facing with vouchers, tax credits, but also what we can do about it, if anything. I think we have some kernels of ideas, but most importantly, we're not going to lose faith. We're going to stick this out. We're going to make this fight work as much as we possibly can. So every single one of you will be invited to join the Legislative Action Committee. There's no commitments coming in to a committee like this, but if you feel so moved, you may end up being like Kayla Dotson, Kathy Dawes, or others of these amazing folks, Eleanor Chaky. So that's every Friday at 3 o'clock Mountain Time. Is that correct, Kathy? I can't.
Nope, she's on mute.
4 o'clock Mountain.
4 o'clock Mountain Time.
3 Pacific.
Pacific. Okay. All right. So the other thing that we'll be doing is sending out all of the things that we've talked about today. Eleanor's list of private schools, Kathy's information about the anti-Christian nationalism movement, and just bits and pieces. So, and a little survey about what you thought about today. So with that, Kendall.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this Sunday afternoon. And we will look forward to seeing you Friday, January 10th. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.